that just makes me think of all of these things that were very delicious and made existence really pleasurable, that are low tech. And all we have to do is just relearn all of these things and put them back into motion. I mean, it's surprising that society has got to the point that they let go of all these easy things that they could have been doing all this time, and replaced it with going to a store and buying a package that has, yet another package and yet another package, and then having to pay for or pay taxes to throw away these giant mountains of trash that you could all skip by just eating fresh foods. I mean, think about the environmental argument there, that people argue about all of the trash and the plastics and the food and all of that could be dramatically reduced if we just started eating like our forefathers ate, and just eat real foods off the land, fresh made. And, a lot of people don't like that idea because we've gone so technologic and urban that a lot of people really can't picture to going back to that.
I'm going to start with a question, or more fill in the blank, I would guess. So the top 10 easiest vegetables to grow. Tomatoes, from 1 to 10, like tomatoes. How difficult do you think it is to grow tomatoes?
3 then, at least.
No, tomatoes is number 10. I can't believe it. Cucumbers, number 9. So I guess the 9th easiest veggie to grow would be a cucumber. Black beans, peas, spinach, coming in at number 5. Potatoes in the top 10 easiest vegetables to grow. Jalapeno peppers. Lettuce is coming in at number 3. Number 2, kale. And number 1 of the top 10 easiest vegetables to grow, radishes. Surprising list, I must say, but there it is.
Where is that based at? Because some of those that were listed easy, I thought are hard, and vice versa there. I mean, I guess it depends on where you're at. The cucumber thing, I've been trying for years, and I've only got 3 or 4 cucumbers out of like 20 plants.
Yeah, it would be specific, huh? Well, the top 10 easiest vegetables to grow in the Arctic. I guess that's a short list. Compared to top 10 easiest vegetables to grow in a greenhouse, that'd be very different. So who else out there thinking of putting together a greenhouse, a cattle panel greenhouse, something like that? Because if you can get some hog panel or cattle panel, which is basically a fence, then you can bend that over, fix 2x4s in a frame, and then you can cover that with 6mm clear plastic and turn yourself into a grow room and have a greenhouse right in your backyard.
That sounds awesome. I'm actually planning on doing that, similar to that, but I'm using landscape timbers for a frame, and then we're going to try to put clear plastic paneling that you usually use for greenhouses, and just kind of wrap it around the whole thing.
Oh, I was jumping outside to see why those dogs were barking, because generally they really don't bark that much. For me, that's like, I need to look outside because they're barking so much, kind of look out. Unbeknownst to me, when I was out there, I'm hearing all these other dogs completely going ape all the way down the whole valley. And then all of a sudden, I could hear the coyotes. So that's the reason the dogs are barking. There's coyotes out there right now. So welcome to Thursday evening in East Tennessee. 10 easiest plants to grow, and a pack of coyotes up in the hillside behind our house here, and the dogs are barking at them. Like, okay, what's the next thought, Ransom?
Yeah, the top 10 kind of brings me to this article from BBC, which is odd. It's like more of a British thing. But anyway, it's called The Revival of Forgotten American Fruit. And it goes in and talks about a pawpaw, which is, something that, I'll be honest, I didn't even really know what it was. I mean, I've heard that before, but this is the first time I'm looking at one. Is this a sweet thing? And where can you grow it? You said you planted some already.
Yeah, I did. Like, I didn't know what it was either just a couple years ago. I'd never had one before. And when I looked into getting trees out on the property, we went to some nurseries, and one was way up in the mountains, and they had pawpaw trees, and they were really mature, big ones, 28, 25-year-old ones, and they were producing fruit. And it was the first time I ever had that fruit. And from the very second that I tasted it, I'm like, I need to grow these. It's like a sweet tart. It's like a little bit sweeter, sweet tart fruit. They take an incredibly long time to grow, and they generally grow in wet places, like right next to a creek. So if you're going to plant those, they're going to take a bit to fruit and flower, like a decade plus. But if you can get them, and they're really easy to grow in the Southeast U.S., it's a fruit worth having.
Like how important is it to plant some of these plants that take years to get, like I was going through my seeds and I found like several packets of asparagus. And then I start reading the instructions on the back and I realized that this thing takes 2 years to get food off of. Like how important is it to really get a structure going on your property or wherever you got planted, where there's lots of stuff that are long-term foods as well as short-term foods? Because, we always talking about radishes and things. What can you get going like microgreens in a hurry? But what about for the really long-term, as far like, of course, fruit trees pop in mind as something that'll produce every year and every year. But what about some of these other vegetables and things like the asparagus there? Because I was thinking, wow, 2 years. I mean, I'm going to have to wait 2 years to get a tasty asparagus.
Food forest. When you're having a food forest, you definitely want to plant something with longevity that even takes a couple of years. Because think about where you've lived. Anybody out there listening? Have anybody lived for 2 years in the same place you're living now? Well, if the answer is yes, you would be getting that asparagus because it's been there for a couple of years. And that's the same with my wine vines. Yeah, you could say, well, you got to wait almost 2 years before the big, or the third year you get the densest fruits or whatever. Would you plant them now and then 3 years you're still in the same place? Some things are worth waiting for. We have these persimmon trees that are right on the edge of the cedar stand. And by hollowing out or like just cutting around them, and those trees this year are just doing so unbelievably spectacular. I'm shocked by how big they got and how girthy they are, but they're persimmon trees. And those also take a couple years to get the fruit. But once you do, they drop it continuously. And, it could take a few years, but it's the whole thing about, do you anticipate being in the same place you are in 5 years or 10 years? Because they always say the best time to plant an orchard, Ransom, 5 years ago. You know what I mean? Or 10 years ago is the best time to plant an orchard.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea that I think everybody should really be headed for. I want to be able to not spend so much time and effort. So actually, whenever I think about asparagus in that way, or plants that take a long time, that's really working for the future. So you can have all kinds of stuff ready that's separate from all the stuff that you plant every single year. This year I was, for example, all of my greens and, all of the sprouts and everything kind of got chewed up and I have them moved and I'm babying all these plants. But those bigger plants like that wouldn't have really been affected by stuff like that. So you kind of have to plan in different scenarios for the short term, midterm, and long term of everything that you're doing. This whole idea of minimal effort gardening, I think that most people would be doing it other than people that have a lot of money, because I found that with a little bit of money, you can find seeds, and there's just so many free resources to start growing food now that by the time you make a lot of mistakes, you have several different growing areas that are doing their own thing that has nothing to do with you now. An example is potatoes and walking onions. I didn't do anything, or actually all of the onions. I got white onions, red onions, yellow onions, spring onions, etc., that I've put out there in the last couple of years. And that's basically the bulk of the food that's out there while I'm over here babying these other plants trying to get new food in this year. I already have a stockpile of minimally effort put into it food that's just sitting out there. It may not be your favorite. You shouldn't really plant things that you're not going to eat, but you can plant things that you'll eat if that's what's around. And it's, maybe not your favorite, but it'll pass. And especially filling up your tummy. That seems to be the direction that everybody, if you're reflecting off the news headlines and all of these things, from stock markets to cryptocurrency to food shortages to baby milk, all of that should be telling you that you really need to disconnect from the system and start figuring out how to produce for yourself. Uncle Sam and your daddy, the government's just not really going to do it without super large, big chains and balls attached to anything that you get from them.
Yeah, you made a comment about the veggies food. It's been around with us for eons. We all know what it is, but now can you prepare it, grow it, and be able to forage for it and have a system to be able to cook it? We got to get off these centralized systems. That's the only thing I can say is what's ever occurring right now. There's so many flags and signs out there that the centralized delivery of things is going to stop. at least for some time until they can reset it and then reset a monetary system with it. But during that transition time, let's say from October until, at least mid-growing time of July or August of the following year, are you able to be self-sufficient for that period of time? Because that's about how long, in my opinion, it's going to take before things get settled down again. It's kind of like COVID in the beginning. There was not enough masks, not enough hand sanitizer. People freaking out that they couldn't get it. Well, now what if it's not enough 6mm poly for my greenhouse and not enough 10-10-10 NPK fertilizer, triple 10, not enough shovels? I mean, if everybody in America went to go get a shovel, there's not enough. You'd have to start going through estate sales and getting through old grandparents' closets and stuff. I would say July-ish, when these kind of vegetables are coming back in, because anybody who's growing could get that up early, and especially if you had a greenhouse, you can get that stuff up in February and grow inside your greenhouse. So even if it was October, November, December, and then it finally got just warm enough for its sunny days and you had a heater in there and you could keep everything growing, that a period of time, or is that, okay, so let's reduce that. Is anybody ready for 4 months completely off centralized systems? Because you got to ask yourself, is the electric system going to stay up during all of this other happenings? Because a lot of people storing frozen food right now. And if the electric goes out, you only have a limited supply of fuel. And could you run a generator for, 120 days straight, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week off the same generator until the power turns back on and then it's intermittent? That's the kind of thinking out the direction of it. I know it's going to be a difficult task to go to think even that far, but really, how can you get off the centralized systems of delivery for everything at this moment?
I'm thinking big cannabis cubes is where I'm putting my effort into the future there.
Like I would trade you something for that.
No, I'm kidding, but we've talked about it before, like stockpiling antibiotics as far as silver goes. And I bet, because I had all these dental issues lately, I've been using a lot of that over the past year. And then they put me on some really strong antibiotics because the amoxicillin wasn't working. And, I brought this up last time we talked, but I was imagining if there were real issues as far as getting medical supplies, pharmaceuticals and things like that, or medical attention, and you got lucky and you got some antibiotics to deal with whatever it was, if they were strong, it would totally devastate your insides, because that's what I've been dealing with. This antibiotic was so strong that I've been just packing down the probiotics, yogurt, etc. And from what I'm reading, a lot of people are out of commission for months at a time. And this is because like their insides are just totally dead. If you're not eating greens from like out of your garden, you're really getting zero probiotics like from the grocery store. That stuff is so sterilized, washed. They ozone some of it in different ways. There's really no good probiotics on that. So if you can imagine having that issue without access to growing your own probiotics, and that seems like a real issue that would kill people, having to deal with that because they may not recover in time or whatever, the situation is with their diet. What are some of the ways that you could actually get probiotics besides just going to the store and buying like yogurt? Can you create it at home? I mean, I'm sure you can. That sounds like a silly
Fermenting,
question,
yeah.
That drink that everybody likes, kombucha and stuff like that. And we know that if you don't have a good gut bacteria, I mean, your mood's going to be off. Your intelligence isn't going to be working right. Even without any kind of economic collapse, the situation we're in, there's going to be all kinds of people with these dietary problems. There already is. And the only way that you're really going to get around that without the system is growing everything, jarring your own foods and fermenting your own stuff. They seem like hobbies right now, but in the right circumstances, these could be life and death knowledges that you need to know.
Snap peas or snow peas, Ransom, protein will be valuable. As I've been told from a fair few people who are well more versed in agriculture than myself, protein will be valuable. So again, you're talking about probiotics, that's fermenting. Clive DeCarl, he was saying that in Northern Europe back before, like we had refrigeration and all these things, for the very long winter, there would be no fresh foods for the probiotics, exactly what you're talking about there, because they're in the really northern climes like Scandinavian countries, and they used way northern Europe, and they would ferment everything to be able to get them through that probiotic or gut thing through the winter. And that is a very important point. And then also, where's your protein coming from? Because without the protein, you're not going to last long either. You just can't live on vegetables. That's why cows will starve to death if they just eat grass only. Like for them grazing in a field, eating field nuts and flowers and stems and stalks and thickness and that sort of thing as they're foraging through with all the different combinations of vitamins and minerals, micronutrients, etc. for the cattle going through a wild field that's 2 or 3 feet tall compared to just nibbling on grass like your front lawn. A cow will starve to death in your front lawn and it just didn't have any food. But overall, it's the same thing. You're going to be needing to think about proteins. So pea protein, they keep trying to get us on insect proteins, but I don't understand why the humble pea is not so looked at. Why has it got to be insects? I'd rather eat snap peas or chickpeas or something.
I don't know if it's just because I grew up poor or near the border, but I'm happy with beans. And I know you got to have some animal fats in there just to think good and have good cholesterol for your brain and everything. But we got to realize, there's people in India that for generations just eat diets full of lentils and other things like that. But you need a body that can work versus a body that meditates, if that makes sense, because good farming and everything. But in my opinion, your body needs to deal with more things than a friendly, peaceful agricultural time, because I don't see us, having that. You need those animal fats enabled to do any real work or, have any real energy to do stuff. But I guess, you could sit there for years and just eat lentils. I mean, if it's about survival, beans, lentils, there's even protein in broccoli. That just seems like a very hard existence to me without at least some basic animal fats in your diet, even besides the protein, just the animal fats themselves. If you've ever eaten like any kind of soup or anything, if there's no something in there that's some kind of animal fat, your brain just doesn't key off as it being a delicious food so much as, just plain veg diet, and I know there's a lot of vegans and stuff out there that'll argue with me over this, but it seems to be that we evolved as an omnivore and that there's a special need for meats and animal fats in our diet for us to run properly as a human being. But remember, I'm not a biologist.
Are you qualified to identify a green cabbage, a Napa cabbage, or a red cabbage? That's the question. Now, you could exist on cabbage. How tasty would that be? You're right. You need the animal fats and you need the fat for your brain. So what plants have fats in them? The micronutrients you want to look at, moringa and these sort of thing, mint family plants. But really, where does the oil come from if you don't have it from an animal-based source? I mean, that would even come down to the basics of trying to get butter made out of milk.
When you talk like that, you make me think the apocalypse might be even better than what's going on right now. Because, when you thought of that, all I could do when you brought up milk, and when I was a kid and I got to go to dairy farms and they always had cream. And, I remember eating fresh berries, cream, and cornflakes as one of the most delicious things that I ever had. And then you think about other stuff. You remember the old guy that used to crank out the ice cream for you with the salt and everything? That just makes me think of all of these things that were very delicious and made existence really pleasurable, that are low tech. And all we have to do is just relearn all of these things and put them back into motion. I mean, it's surprising that society has got to the point that they let go of all these easy things that they could have been doing all this time and replaced it with going to a store and buying a package that has, yet another package and yet another package, and then having to pay for or pay taxes to throw away these giant mountains of trash that you could all skip by just eating fresh foods. I mean, think about the environmental argument there, that people argue about all of the trash and the plastics in the food, and all of that could be dramatically reduced if we just started eating like our forefathers ate and just eat real foods off the land, fresh made, and trade with your neighbor. And, a lot of people don't like that idea because we've gone so technologic and urban that a lot of people really can't picture to going back to that. But think about all the stuff that came out of there, all of the inventions. It was kind of like a second renaissance in the United States with all these farmers and different people coming up with things to make life easier. And this is all stuff that I'm talking about that is pre-technological. So, I'm not talking about gas mowers out there and everything, but they had plenty of things to make all of these things we enjoy today in an old way. And why couldn't we bring back all of those and imagine the small economics that would return to neighborhoods and communities if people in mass started doing that and going back to that?
Too many people are going to get off the system. And see, this is exactly the opposite of what's happening now. It's about getting you on the system as much as they can, so when these basic services of centralized delivery disappear, you will only have the option of government to take care of you. And it comes back down to it. If it's at the base level of food, your family starves, your children starve in front of you, you take the government assistance, but you understand what that means for the family, that if you don't do what is told, then the food is removed and your family dies from no food. Or something very close to it, where you don't want to see your children not eating for a week or weeks and only scrimpy meals of broth somewhere for years on end. You don't want to see that. But that's what is at stake when even just one family is reliant that much on a food delivery system, because all others have ceased, including the fuels, electrical. What would people do if you give back that to them, the allegiance they would show you by giving them the basics of life comfort? You said it makes life a little more comfortable. Well, food, a house, and electricity make things very comfortable. Now, if you're receiving all three of those things through, say, universal basic income, your digital rationing card for food, different allocations, but you're still being fed, but you need to uphold the system. That's where they're getting everybody. So if they can get enough people into it and really create that, pendulum swing where more people in the system, as this collapse comes in, as they get people into the digital IDs and all these things to get into that system, to uphold it, because they're the ones feeding you and they can turn off your food and your money because it's digital. You're going to uphold that system and defend it to your very last breath, because that's what you need to do to keep your family alive. I don't know, the more you get off the system, the more they want to get you back in. And it's cool when it's like 1% of the population. Oh, look how cute it is. They're living on a farm. But when it becomes 40% of the population, like it did during World War II with the Victory Gardens, and 40% of all food was grown in Victory Gardens in America, in backyards and street sides. 40%. That was way too much. As soon as that war ended, they got everybody back into the supermarkets immediately as fast as they could. But imagine if we would have continued off that system. We didn't even need to rely on centralized systems for food, for the basics, especially for vegetables. From World War II to now, and that would have expanded to 50-60% of all veggies and food grown in America was grown in the local areas. What control would a government have over people? If they couldn't starve them, steal from them, control them in cities and whatnot, what power's left? None, because all the power is not centralized. It's with the people producing, and then where's the tax revenue? Oh, we can't have that.
What do you think about this? Because you talk a lot about rationing and how this whole system of the interconnected digital systems, from food to finance to health to travel, and they're making them all combined into one thing, and they're really trying to put it out there as something that you're going to have to do in order to travel, fly, or do any of this stuff. It's like a bombardment on so many levels that someone like myself now just sees like a wall of negative stories and directions to send everybody in that bothers to tap into the internet. And I'm sure it's the same on television if you still watch television. And, I know we've had wars and bad times, but for the most part, the earth has always provided. And it's basically that simple when we're going into this next phase, that if you could get in harmony with the earth again, it will feed you and take care of you.
Look at yourself as consciousness having a human experience. And this is, I kid you not when I say that, because if you look at it as a non-personal thing, as me, David, as myself with the ego and processing of information directed at me, the physical thing. If I take it a step outside of, hey, I'm just infinite consciousness having a human experience, it's no different than getting on a ride at your favorite amusement park and going up on the roller coaster. You're there for the experience. You just got to take the ride. You don't know where the next curve is going to come in, how it's going to jostle the body, how you're going to rip around corners at high speed and enjoy that ride. You're there for the experience of it. Same thing. I'm looking at it as not directed at me, but the experience of me as a human in this experience. It's a little bit interesting, but that's the only way I can really rationalize a lot of things that I see is I'm stepping outside of it. It's almost as if I'm completely separating myself from it. And it becomes something to look at as you would look at something in an aquarium. And that's the way I have to separate that out. It's not affecting me. It is, and I'm looking at it as a tapestry of stories as things would go through, just like you would watch clouds move through a sunset. Look at it in a distant fashion, separated from yourself, and then separate those two and take a look at it. It's just information. It's just stories. It is what it is versus it's all directed at me. I understand I'm going to be going through the food stuff with everybody else, but you're right, Ransom. This earth has provided for billions of years of animals, plants, insects, fish, amphibians, and all types of things that are on our planet. Bird life. But the way we're doing it now, we could have complete abundance. Imagine how many lawns are being used. Just the very simplest fact that if they could teach us to use lawns in a different way, we could feed the world. Just using the lawns of most Americans. And I have this chart here, the age of American infrastructure. You alluded to the point there. That dam, when it went low, the average age of a expected service for, this is from the American Society of Civil Engineers and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So when they built a dam, the average expected service on that dam was 50 years. Well, the dams in general, average across the U.S. are 57 years old, and the lock chambers as well, and the levees. But I'll stay on the lock chambers because that's where your grains come through. And see, that's the oldest of all of the infrastructure. 50 years is the expected service, but the average lock chamber, average, not the super oldest one, which there's going to be that, is 63 years old. That's the average of a lock, the age of it. But think about how many grains and grain barges are going through the St. Lawrence Seaway and all the way down through the Mississippi River, up through the Great Lakes. How many locks are really used across the vast, vast amount of cargo in barges? That's through locks. If that were to stop, there's really very few ways to get the amount of grain. We're talking millions of tons, moved across to a different place. Trucks aren't going to do that. That'd be too fuel inefficient. Railroads, they're claiming that they can't take on any more space because whatever issues. So there would be no way to reroute. They're actually cutting cargo routes off and delivery for a lot of dairy farmers out in California. They've just said no more deliveries. The cargo capacity has been reduced and we just don't have the teams and the crews. And you keep hearing this again and again. So the locks are something to look at that nobody's looking at. If those stop or those malfunction, then everything does stop and there's no replacement. 10 years ago, yeah, we'd have just rerouted to rail because there'd be so much excess rail capacity. But now for some reason, a few years later, there's none. It's all gone. Where are the rail cars going? That is a question too. You can't tell me that they got to reduce across every American railroad 20% of carrying capacity and passage routes because there's not enough cars. Okay, where did 20% of American rail cars just go to is the question.